Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 199. Crikey, getting close to episode 200. Today, Bob and I are talking about the role of joint ventures in property development. This will be an amazing episode. Jump on in and prepare to be, very well educated. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome to episode 199. Hi, Bob.
G'day, Hilary.
You say it like we just walked in from different rooms, but we just walked in from the room out there. Anyway.
Yep.
Hey,
I've been looking at you all day.
Have you now? Oh, there you go. Hey, we're talking about joint ventures today, and I know I briefly put this under you and said this is today's topic, but as per usual, we don't have to worry too much about what we talk about because you do know a lot about it, most things, everything in property development only, I'm going to say there. Hey, before we get started, giving away a copy of Property Millionaires Exposed, and that this week is going to Julie Fitzgerald. Julie sent us an email. I think you either sent me an email or commented on the YouTube page. So thank you so much, Julie. And the post to you. How was that? I think Shelley may even have posted that one today. All right, Bob, before we kick off, what's the tip for the week?
I thought I'd do a little fishing tip. There's an old saying in fishing, small bait catches small fish and a big bait catches big fish. So, as you know, we went fishing the other day. I had quite a small bait on, expecting a small fish probably, but I got a 43 centimetre brim.
He actually did. Oh, my goodness.
It's the biggest brim I've caught.
I've never
on quite a small little yabby.
Never seen one that big. He actually thought you had a stingray on, didn't you?
Well, I did because we'd caught a couple of stingrays, and don't they take you for a ride?
Oh, so annoying. Yeah, that was amazing fishing. Couldn't believe it. 43 centimetre brim.
Yeah.
Because most of them are sort of 30, 35. Yeah. Isn't the
Oh, probably, yeah. I mean, the average, there's lots of little ones out at the moment.
Oh, my gosh.
Probably doing okay to get a 30 centimetre one, I think.
Yeah, that was amazing. And it was fat. The fat too at the moment, the fish. The fish are incredibly fat. Anyway, enough fishing talk. Not everybody likes fishing like you and I. That was over the Easter break, and we actually went fishing 4 days in a row. We had a bit of a fishing fest, which was absolute fun. And, Bob, today talking about the role of joint ventures in property development. Now, the goal of this is to teach you guys, the listeners, just how joint ventures work and the benefits and risks and how to structure successful partnerships. And that's a real key word in this one, partnerships. So we'll unpack that for you today. But before we do, I want to welcome everyone. And if you're new to our channel, please hit subscribe. Oh my gosh, I sound like one of those YouTubers, don't I? If you're new to my channel, please hit subscribe. But we would love for you to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Somebody we've had a few comments lately. And yeah, do. I saw Bob even replied to one. Well, he wrote the reply and somebody did it for you, I think. But it was great. So feel free to ask a few questions and hit like and subscribe to us. That means that more people get to see it. And we know the podcast is very popular and it's a great way for you to get to know us. Anyways, let's jump into joint ventures, Bob.
Yeah.
Can we start with really getting you to explain the basics of a joint venture in property development and how they differ from other funding strategies?
Yeah, well, to do a property development, you really need three elements. You need money, you need time, and you need knowledge. Now, if you've got money, time, and knowledge, great, you can go and do a property development.
Happy days.
Happy days. Not everybody has all three, but it doesn't mean it's game over. And typically the sort of joint ventures that we tend to get involved in is where one party might have the money and the other party has the knowledge and the time to do a property development. So it's certainly not game over if you haven't got the money, and nor is it game over if you've got the money and don't have the knowledge. And so any good joint venture, and not just in property development really, any good joint venture is where two or more parties come together and share their strengths. And in this case, we're talking about financial strength from one and the knowledge and time from the other.
And we've got so many people in our community doing joint ventures, don't we? And mentoring students, so many. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest sort of ways to move forward in property development. Before we move into it, Bob, I'm just going to debunk, and I don't even know if it's in the rest of my format where I put that, but I really want to cover off on, there are lots of people deeming to be educators these days, and that's cool. You can do one course and call yourself an educator, knock yourself out. It's their students. You've got to do your due diligence on everything, property development and your educator. But when it comes to people using that as lead magnet bait, saying you can get into property developments with no money, you can. There is a big but there, isn't there, Bob?
Well, first of all, you got to have the time and the knowledge.
And I think you've
if
got
you've got none of the three, you got a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Look, it's joint ventures. You can explain them fairly simply, but to actually do them, to structure them, to finance them, and to pull them off, there's a bit more than just the surface look at it. And so I did my first joint venture over 40 years ago now with my sister's boyfriend. And so I've had a lot of experience with all sorts of joint ventures over the years. And some of the big companies I worked for, we did like big joint ventures, including, I remember a whole city block in the CBD we did with Balderstone Hornibrook back in the day. So big joint ventures, but also little ones, tiny ones.
Also, Bob, I think that people don't also understand, people listening, and remember, I'm talking to a lot of you every day, talked to some of you yesterday and today, but they don't understand that there is very often more than one joint venture. There is very often, even we look at the duplex that we did down the road, that was actually, there's two joint ventures in there, isn't there? Because it was the coming together, the joint venture, but then there was also of the developers doing the deal with us where they put the money in. But then there was also a loan partner on top of that at a certain time. So that became a second woven in strategy. And there are many. Yeah. So I'm thinking of another development you've got underway right now. How many strategies, I'm going to call them strategies now because we're under the umbrella of joint venture, there are so many different strategies. So how many strategies are in one of the bigger developments you've got going on? It's staged, it's big. How many would be in there?
I'd say 5 or 6.
Yep.
So
people don't understand that it's not just necessarily you get a loan partner or a joint venture partner where they're in for the equity. There's so many different ways that you can layer to make something successful. And you tapped on it earlier around having knowledge and time. I think time's not really the issue. I believe it's knowledge when it comes to joint ventures. Would you say that would be one of the bigger problems?
Well, knowledge is the one that's in short supply. And a lot of people don't realise that. You tend to think about what you don't have. So if you're short of money, all you can think about is, money. Money's really hard to get. The thing is that there is a lot of money out there. And there's not a lot of people who know how to put it to really good use. So in a property development where you can get the sort of returns you get on property development, anybody can stick their money in the bank, and that's fine if that's what you want to do. But to make the sort of returns that you get out of property development, obviously you have to have the knowledge to be able to do that. And to me, that's what's in short supply. There's plenty of money out there. People have money, they have cash on deposit. A lot of people have lines of credit still where they can take money off that. And in some structures, you can even use your super, self-managed super. So there is lots of money out there.
Yeah, so I think we're going to, hopefully already we've got you understanding that there are so many, more than just loaning somebody money or being on the title or even JV with a landowner, but there are so many more ways and they often combine. You often do more than one. I mean, I'm thinking even of Alex's. He's got numerous in there already, and I just overlooked an information memorandum for one of our current mentoring students, Simon. I'll give you a wee plug here, Simon. He's looking for an investor. What a fab. He did a fab. That's great what you've done. I love it. And that's one of the things you've got to do as well. You've got to be able to present your information so people know that you know what you're doing. If you can't even articulate it, then people aren't going to listen. But anyway, Bob, people aren't going to be interested. But anyway, so what are the key benefits, Bob, of having or having a joint venture or doing a joint venture or being part of one for the developer and then for the person with the money?
Well, from the developer, they get to share in the development profits without necessarily putting money in. So there's so many ways of cutting a deal. But look, a common type, a joint venture with an equity partner, as we call it, the big benefit for them, they're happy to do the work. They've got the time, they've got the knowledge, they'll do the work, and they'll make quite a bit of money without actually investing money. And that's got to be a big bonus. From the investor's point of view, Well, they get to make quite a substantial return on their money with really not doing anything other than becoming part of the joint venture. So I'm separating it there and saying one party is doing all the work. We'll call that the developer. And the other party is putting in the money but not really doing the work. So a huge benefit for both. And that's what a joint venture should be. It should be a win for both parties. And it can be, for sure.
And so what are the different types of joint venture partnerships?
Well, look, they've got all sorts of names. A lot of people mix up things that aren't even joint ventures, but typically we try and give them a name, keep it simple. So what we call a joint venture with an equity partner. Now, an equity partner, some people say money partners, but then money partners can take all sorts of forms. It could be equity or it could be debt. So I like to say joint venture with an equity partner. So that's somebody, an investor, we'll call them an investor, who joins a developer in a project. And so they come into the project. They're most likely going to be on the title. In other words, they'll be part of the structure that owns the site and does the development. And they'll, along with the developer, they'll be on the loan, they'll borrow the money, but their role is to put in the equity. So in any development, you have to put a certain amount of money in up front and the financier lends you most of the money, which is great. It's where that bit of money comes from, what we call equity. And in the case of a joint venture with an equity partner, it comes from that person. They put in the required amount of equity. It could be something like, 20, 25%, even up to 30% sometimes of the cost. Let's say 25% of the cost, they put in that much.
When you say cost, Bob, you mean purchase cost or total development cost?
Total development
TDC.
costs, what we call TDC. So let's say the total development costs were $2 million. They might have to put in, say, $500,000. The financier puts in $500,000. That's going to finance the project, the $2 million cost. And so that's their role. And this equity partner, they're probably going to be on the title, they'll be on the loan, they'll be in there. They won't do the work necessarily. The other party, you might call it the working party or whatever you want to call it, the developer, there's all sorts of terms that we use, they'll do the work. And at the end, when it's all finished and it gets sold, well, the first money to come out of the sales will pay off the financier. The second set of money will give the equity back to the equity partner. And then whatever's left is profit. And then that will get shared in whatever pre-agreed proportion they agreed to in the first place.
So that's an equity partner. What about a loan partner?
Yeah, well,
joint venture with a loan partner.
A loan partner. We call it a loan partner. We differentiate when some people just say a money partner. It could be an equity partner or a loan partner. So like the name suggests, a loan partner loans money or lends money to the developer, but they're not part of the project. So they're not part of the ownership structure. They're not on the development loan. They're just, if you like, out to one side, and they lend the money to the development entity as a loan. And like any loan, at the end they get their principal back and they get paid interest. So that's the difference between an equity partner and a loan partner. An equity partner gets profit share because in the financial world, equity normally means profit share. With the loan partner, they get paid an interest rate, but they're not part of the project at all. And so in that little example I just said before, if the total costs were $2 million and you need $500,000 equity to get the finance from the financier, that loan partner would still lend the $500,000 to the project like the equity partner, but they're not part of it. It'll be a loan from them being outside of the project.
And are they loaning to the project or loaning to the developer?
Well, the developer.
Yeah.
Whatever entity that the developer has set up to own the land, that will be the borrower. And the loan partner, they'll have their own entity. It could be an individual. They could be lending through a company or a trust. It really doesn't matter. Well, it might matter to them because they'll be getting interest in the form of income. And so it might matter to them what sort of entity they have when the interest comes, because that's taxable.
I'm going to go back, Bob, when we were talking about joint venture with an equity partner. You said something, and I remember in early days of me learning all this stuff, I'm going to say, you used to say this word and it would confuse me. When you're borrowing money, it could be cash or it could be debt. And I used to think, how do you borrow debt? You may have hijacked other people there.
Equity or debt, maybe.
Yeah. So explain that one.
Well, finance really is either equity or debt. So debt is a loan in the form of a loan, and loans carry with them typically interest rates. Equity, it's still part of all the funds, if you like, but it carries with it a sense of ownership. and not necessarily a loan as such, although equity would need to be repaid at some point, but not like a loan. And typically, if you want to keep it like black and white, equity produces profit share, loan produces interest rate.
Perfect. Actually, that's a brilliant breakdown. I do remember that one used to hijack me earlier. I was like, "What do you mean, debt?" There's been a couple of things that hijack.
Yeah, they also, without getting too complex, they have different types of risk involved with them as well, between debt and equity. Because when you sell a project at the end, the money starts to come in, the debt gets paid first. So your financier, typically, if it's just a simple project where you put in some equity, you borrow the rest from the financier, you go and do the project yourself, you're selling it at the end, the financier gets paid first because that is debt, it's a loan. You get your equity back after that.
Okay, and then Bob, the last one we're going to cover today is the joint venture with a landowner, as far as that as a joint venture.
Well, yeah, we often use the term joint venture with a landowner, and technically it's not even a joint venture. So just to explain it briefly, lots of people own land that has development potential. Now, if they have the time and the knowledge, they can develop it themselves, or they can sell it if they like, of course. But not everybody that owns land that has development potential just wants to sell it and get the value of the land. A lot of people would love to be able to develop that property themselves and get the full benefit of it. But they don't have the time, they don't have the knowledge. And that's where the opportunity could come to hook up with a developer. And so the developer, same thing again, developer has the time and the knowledge. And in this case, the landowner has the land. Now, the land can be equal to money. So when we talk about putting equity into a project, in other words, that's the money that we put in, let's say that 25% of the cost, whatever it is, that we put in. We normally think of it as being cash, but it doesn't have to be. It could be real estate, it could be land. And there will be a dollar equivalent. So it might be, if you've got $1 million cash, it's worth $1 million cash. But if you have a property with no debt on it and it's worth $1 million, that might be the equivalent of maybe 70 or even 75% cash equivalent. And so equity can be cash or it can be land. Ideally unencumbered land where the financier can take a first mortgage over it. So in the case of the joint venture, as we call it, with a landowner, instead of an equity partner like we talked about before putting in cash, we've got a landowner putting in land. But similarly, the developer does the development and it gets sold and they share at the end. So what happens is the landowner puts the land up and that satisfies the equity component. The financier lends the rest of the money in cash. The developer does the development and at the end, it gets sold. So what normally happens, it gets sold. So first of all, of course, the financier, they get their money back. Then the next money to come in, instead of paying the equity partner back like we did previously in cash, we now pay the landowner back what the land was worth. And they get that component. And then whatever's left is profit. And then that can get shared between the two parties. So it's technically not a joint venture, although calling it one is a pretty good way of describing it. From the developer's point of view, they're really acting as a development manager because the land never gets sold. So the land stays in the name of the landowner. And the reason that is that if that land was to be, say, sold into an entity that both the developer and the landowner share, they're triggering potential capital gains tax and also paying stamp duty. Whereas if it stays in the name of the landowner, certain agreements can be put into place that work so that it gets used as security, money gets borrowed, development gets done, gets sold, financier gets paid out, and then part of that agreement is that the landowner then gets paid their land equivalent, and then the profit, whatever's left over again, gets shared in a certain percentage. So there's benefits to both parties again.
We'll unpack those in a sec, Bob. I just sort of want to take this point to sort of let people who are listening thinking, wow, yeah, I could do that. Or the people who are thinking, oh my gosh, that's like too scary. Just know that they are so common, these strategies. We have so many people doing them and we do them. So that's really normal to do this sort of thing. But there are some roles, responsibilities. There's some risk sharing. There's some exit strategies and there's some legal agreements that have to happen. So we're going to walk through those now. And we'll start, Bob, with the roles and responsibilities. So what each person brings to the table what are the roles and responsibilities? Let's go with an equity partner. What are the roles and responsibilities of both parties?
Well, to keep it simple, the roles and the responsibilities of the developer is to manage the project from beginning to end and on time, on budget, and create a profit. That's their role. The role of the equity partner is to supply that equity, typically in the form of cash. And in a lot of cases, that equity partner, as I say, just goes back to sleep again.
Yep.
And in a lot of cases, that is. Look, that equity partner could be somebody who has no knowledge of property development.
It's been me.
No, well, it wouldn't be you. But,
no, but I've done it.
Oh, you've done plenty of it, but you're not without the knowledge. I mean,
no.
Look, you could do one with your doctor or your dentist, right?
Yep.
So they just want to make money. That's all they want to do. They don't want to be involved in the project. They don't want to. You'll report to them, like report every month and tell them what's going on. But that's all. Now, occasionally, the money partner could be somebody in our property development community, and this happens constantly because of our community, because of people meeting at our workshops and all sorts of things. We have people doing joint ventures with others, and it could be exactly the same. One partner puts in the money, the other partner puts in the work. But when you've got two people who are in the property development sphere, the equity partner sort of can't help themselves on wanting to be involved, way more than, say, the doctor would, who doesn't want any involvement. And
unless, of course, the doctor's in the community.
Well, there's a few of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, you could have not totally a silent partner, the equity partner. They're not totally silent. They might want some involvement in it, and that can be done. But you've got to be very clear on who does what.
And we'll get to that in legal contracts, I think, because that might fall into that department. So roles and responsibilities when it comes to a loan partner?
Well, pretty simply, the loan partner has to put up the money in the form of a loan, and they get an interest rate return.
I've done this one too.
At some point. You've done everything. There's a lot of variables in there that we haven't got time to go in. Remember, we had a 2-day seminar, or not a seminar, what would we call it, a 2-day workshop last year, just purely on joint ventures. So, we could turn this podcast into 2 days, but probably not.
I think the best thing, though, that I want for this podcast to do is to open people's eyes so they actually understand that they're simple but they're complex. They're worth doing. Everyone does them, but you've just got to do them well, and you have to know the roles and responsibilities.
You've got to be taught well how to do them.
Exactly.
Ideally, have your hand held on the first one or two.
And don't go into it blindly thinking it's going to be so easy. Unless your mum or dad's going to be the funder, it's going to take work if you don't know people. Hence the reason I'm giving the wee nudge here for our mate Simon, the mentoring student. There we go, second plug. Anyone want to invest with him? He's got a great project, and reach out to me if you're interested in having a chat with him. But anyway, so loan, very similar. And then what about the roles and responsibilities of the joint venture with a landowner? They're all pretty simple. But
yeah, they're all very similar. They're variations of a theme. Well, the landowner, his responsibility is to, and now ideally we want little debt or even no debt, perfectly no debt. If that land is carrying, 60, 70, 80% debt on it, it's no good because there's not enough equity left in it. So we want the equity out of the land. So their responsibility is ideally come up with a block of land that's got little or no debt, but then become part of the project by putting that land up as security for the developer to borrow against, to then have the funds to do the project. So that's their role. And the role of the developer, as always, do the development from beginning to end, produce that profit.
Okay, Bob, so what about profit and risk sharing? Let's break through these. And remember, these aren't the only strategies. There are plenty more, but these are the most common. The the profit and risk sharing for the equity partner.
Yeah, so there's risk in everything, really.
But the profit first, then the risk.
Yeah, so profit is often proportional to risk, but not just that, because there's a thing called IP that has a big value. In other words, the knowledge that you have as a developer is worth a lot. It's hard to put a dollar value on it.
Because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Exactly. So in terms of the risk, well, you've got the typical risks that you have in property development. In other words, you're borrowing money and you have to be able to pay it back. So you want the project to go well, make a profit, pay back the financier. And with the equity partner, they're both on the loan. So that's the risk, I guess. Do it properly, make a profit. In terms of the reward or the profit share, it's really up by negotiation. It's not uncommon to, in that equity partner situation, if the equity partner pulls in all the equity, the other person does the work, to share that profit 50-50. That's not locked in stone. It doesn't have to be that. It is by negotiation. But they're sharing the risk. They're sharing the reward. You might say the risk for the equity partner is high because it's actually their money, and that would be true. But then the other person's doing all the work as well, and their knowledge is value. Their IP that they carry is value. So a lot of people say, well, one cancels out the other. We'll just split the profit 50-50.
We've had in the past, I remember a couple of mentoring students got together after a while and they had a conversation you jumped on with both of them because they wanted to unpack how they would split it because one mentoring partner ended up, well, this is like years later, but he was back into working in a business, and his business, he said to me, I've got to make hay while the sun shines. It was doing really well. So he went back to sort of his business and he ended up partnering with another mentoring student. And then their negotiation, you sat with them and unpacked how that would be because one was putting in the money and, you know, how it all was going to work. And that's really, it was almost like you were a mediator at that time because they were all sort of, sometimes people go into that a little bit unsure about what their value is or how it works. And because even though they both had the IP, you know, they both, so it was kind of an interesting scenario.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I think they ended up at 65, 55, 45, didn't they?
45,
55, sorry, got that
nothing
wrong.
wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's other variables in there that we know can come in. I mean, it could be that let's say you needed the 500,000 we talked about. Well, what if the equity partner put in 400,000 and the developer put in 100,000? Well, I've just changed the equation now. What's that worth? Well, you know, there's 1,000 ways, like I keep saying, to cut these sorts of deals.
Okay, what about profit and risk sharing with the loan partner, Bob?
Well, there is risk once again. I mean, the developer is taking risk on two fronts. He's borrowing money from the loan partner. That's a risk because he has to pay it back. And borrowing money from the financier, which is a risk and you have to pay it back. So it's all predicated on doing a successful development.
Good word, predicated.
I like that one. Eh?
I do, it's good.
and so that is the risk from the loan partner because they're risking money, they're lending money. They'll want some form of security. And so that would depend what that is, whether it's a second mortgage or whatever it happens to be. So they're taking risks. They're getting some form of security. The reward, the same thing. Well, for the developer, obviously the reward is they could do a development without putting any money in, make a profit, making money out of no money down. That's a great thing. For the loan partner, well, they get quite a healthy interest rate return on their funds, and so that's their reward. And it'd be way more than you get in the bank because of the nature of the lending. And
then lastly, the profit and risk for the joint venture with the landowner.
Yep, well, pretty similar. I mean, from the developer's point of view, they're risking. They're borrowing funds to do the development, so there's that element of risks. Once again, they have to perform. Predicated, here we go, on a successful development.
How good's that word?
From the landowner's point of view, well, their land is being used as security in the same way that cash was being used as security for the equity partner. So that is an element of risk that the project has to go well. And so, yeah, I mean, it's risk and reward. It's like most things in life, really.
And then lastly, and I think these will mostly be the same, we'll start with legal agreements, and they will be the same all the way through, as in the importance of working with the right people for the right contracts. Bob, have you ever seen anyone or know anyone that have done joint ventures, any of the types available, and not used the right paperwork and it's come undone?
I've met people where it's come undone and they didn't have paperwork. That would have to be the worst. People have lent money without even a proper agreement at all.
Actually, what about people that had different lots of paperwork? We had some people come to us and they just changed the name of something, the name of the trust.
That was a fraudulent matter, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen all sorts of things because of our profile in the property development world. Sometimes we get calls from people who are in trouble. We don't know them. They're not part of our community, but they're in trouble and they're looking for help, and we get to the odd phone call from people like that. First thing I do is just try and understand what the deal is.
Would you agree
are
to?
They, in other words, are they an equity partner? Are they a loan partner? and what sort of documentation do they have? What sort of security do they have? Sometimes people have a loan agreement, but they don't have any security. Well, that's fine. That's not illegal. It's called an unsecured loan. In an unsecured loan, you should be getting a way bigger interest rate return than a secured loan. And there's 100 types of secured loans. So, yeah, it's just naivety. So the worst I've seen is people have lent money with no documentation. Other than that, I've seen people lend money on very scant documentation. And in the case you're talking about, fraudulent documentation.
What did they do there? They used a different...
They set up an entity for the development that was the name of the street, the street number, let's say 12 Smith Street, ST, Proprietary Limited. And then they set up another entity, 12 Smith Street, STRWT, Proprietary Limited. And a lot of people just didn't pick up the difference. They had two separate companies with two separate names. And so funds that were supposed to have been lent to the ST were lent to the STRWT and were used for...
Overseas holidays?
Used for things that they're not supposed to be used for, because the money should have gone to the other entity. And in that case, I think a chunk of that, the funds that should have been dedicated to the project, were used on some short-term high-profit escapade that didn't come off. And the whole thing collapsed like a deck of cards,
Yeah. So it's really important that you do... It's okay, like you say, to have, if you want an unsecured loan, that's fine. You're just going to have a higher return for your money because you're taking on more risk. But you do need to understand that the paperwork and what you're signing and make sure that there is some. So, Bob, what about exit strategies? Are there different exit strategies for each of those, or are they always similar?
Well, similar in a way in that generally the project needs to be developed, sold, and then from the sales proceeds, the equity partners paid back their equity and they get their profit share. The loan partners paid back their loan and they get their interest. I mean, there's variables. For instance, on the loan partner one, the way developers like to do it is we pay them their interest at the end out of the settlement funds, not pay them their interest on the way. Now, it can be either way. But so in terms of the exit strategy for the loan partner, their exit strategy would be then to, at the end of the project, they get their principal back, whatever they loaned, plus all their interest that's accrued, if it went that way. Equity partner, same thing. So the exit strategy normally is to sell. You can do a joint venture, and it's more complex again, where perhaps the equity partner might keep some product, some stock. Now, you might do 4 townhouses, and part of the deal with the equity partner is the normal deal, but they might keep one of the, which becomes a slightly different deal called a stock back deal. So once again, there's all these different strategies, and you can have mixtures. I've done projects that have got 4 different creative strategies in the one project.
In fact, we were looking at one recently that we were thinking of doing, which had a 5-year hold strategy before the exit. And that was just because of the type of product it is. And then it would be a sell to a major fund. So the sell price is a lot higher than just a standard sell. But the investors needed to be in for the 5-year. It hasn't gone ahead. It doesn't mean it's not going ahead.
4 to 5, no.
Yeah.
No, but that's more like a syndicate.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like a joint venture, but can turn into a syndicate when you get enough joint venture partners. We sort of call them a syndicate.
Yeah, what is that tip over?
There's no real tip.
Who decides?
Nobody. It's not defined anywhere. But I'd typically say if you've got more than 3 parties, it becomes a syndicate, really.
Right.
But that's not black and white or locked in stone. You won't see that definition anywhere. Yeah, so combinations of these sorts of things. But it's not even uncommon to, on a project, without getting complex at all, to have an equity partner in a project and then to introduce a loan partner later at the construction stage.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens quite regularly.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's pretty stock standard around what I know. Yeah. Yeah, it's very bread and butter stuff. It's pretty normal, but for people hearing about how it can work, it's such a possibility.
It's quite mind expanding for people that haven't heard about this before. We're only scratching the surface with these.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I think I worked out one day, I don't know, somewhere between $300 and $400 million worth of joint ventures over my life. Not all my own projects, also companies I've worked for. And like there's just so many ways of cutting deals, honestly.
And you're like the whiz on the paperwork. I didn't even understand. I'm like, oh my goodness.
I think if you've got a really good understanding of structures
Yes.
and a really good understanding of finance.
Yes.
That's what you need. Like, not to start off.
No.
We teach people all the time how to do the simple ones, and the simple ones are great. But like as you get like bigger and expand and move into larger projects, I mean, as you know, we're looking at a potential joint venture at the moment, which is quite a large one. I mean, you sat in on the board meeting with us as well on that one. That's a type of joint venture as well, but that's a big one. Like, that can be little. That could be a splitter. That could be, two vertical retirement villages. Who knows?
It's so funny when you say I sat on the board meeting. Half the time I think, because I sit there in a room full of men, and I think they look at me and go, okay, are you going to make the coffee soon? I'm just waiting for one of them to say it. Like, no, Bob will.
Well, it was explained that you look after the investor liaison and investor management part of our development company. So that's why you were there. Obviously, you know that.
But even the little, like you're talking about, that the interest payments may be sometimes on the way through, and that's something that we do. And even now with a couple of the joint ventures we have, because the money came in, the money's got to come in early, so you're certain it's going to be there for, when you've got the settlement happening, and over that period of time there's interest paid, and then you start your BASs, and like there is quite a lot that goes into that sort of thing. So it's not difficult, but it is quite intricate. A lot of paperwork, more than you see. So, but what would you say would be the biggest pitfall when it comes to, let's pick any joint venture? What's been the most common thing? What's the thread that you think, oh my goodness, if I could just write it on a billboard, I would?
I think it'd be inadequate documentation, because within the document everything's explained about how it's going to work, who's doing what, how the money works, the expectations, the profitability, the feasibility, everything's in that document. It's a very solid document. I'll call it a joint venture agreement. Something that's inadequate or not at all, heaven forbid, because I suppose it's a bit like getting married. Everyone gets married not expecting to get divorced. And the same thing, you go into a joint venture expecting things to go well. They don't always go well for a myriad of reasons. And that's when things aren't going well, is when you really need a good, solid agreement that spells out everything, every contingency, what happens when this happens and that happens. And I think that's got to be the platform that the joint ventures build on. You actually negotiate all the joint venture first, and it ends up in that document.
Yeah.
But that document is really important.
And Bob, I think from what I know on just about every joint venture I've been involved in, just about every one, and I've been in a few, they usually run a little bit over, don't they?
Not unusual.
Yeah.
That's property development though.
Yeah. And so I think people going into one as an investor, sometimes it can be a few months, sometimes it can be longer. You just never know what it's going to be. So in the paperwork, if that's tight, what happens? What happens there? Have you ever seen that one be a problem where, say, it was
it's dealt with in the agreement? What would happen? Typically it would roll. It would keep rolling at that same interest rate for a certain period of time, and that might be it could roll over for 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is. It's how it's written. It's how you negotiate it in the first place. Really, is what ends up in the document. It's a bit like same as a loan agreement with a financier. Sometimes you go over time. How's that work? Well, keep paying them interest at least.
Yeah. And I think another number one tip, and I'm sure I remember talking about this when we were podcasting where we used to live somewhere else. So I can actually picture saying it in a particular podcast room. It's really important as the developer to always communicate well with the investor. Keep them in the loop as to what's happening, whether it's good, whether it's bad, because sometimes things do roll, or I just keep them in the loop. It's so, I mean, even keeping them up to date with what's happening, like my role as well is to send through pictures or say this has happened, or, let the investors know where things are at, because for some of the investors, they're really excited about it. They're like, yay. And they usually email back, oh my God, thanks so much, Hilary, or especially if it's photos and stuff or little videos. Well, I think we can wind this one up, 2 reasons, because I can hear your alarm going off, and I think you've got a mentoring chat with somebody shortly. But I just think that I hope we've really got through to people that there are so many options when it comes to creative strategies, and don't always get sucked into everyone can do property with little money, no money of their own. You can, but you do need to have a solid understanding of what you need to do. That's vital. So roll with that. On that, we do have our Property Mastermind bundle, fabulous education program. It comes with a workshop. It comes with lifetime access to the videos. It has the live Q&A every fortnight, fabulous feasibility calculator, and numerous courses in there. So you are really well looked after with that. So if you want to know more about that, head on over to our website. There'll be a link below. But otherwise, it's propertymastermind.com.au. And of course, we have our mentoring program. But we've got our workshop coming up in September on the 19th, 20th and 21st. And that's a phenomenal event that you don't want to miss. See the master on stage himself. It's really worth going to or coming to. And of course, me there entertaining you. That's kind of my role. But that's about it from us this week, Bob. Episode 199. High five.
Whoa.
Well done.
Well done.
Yeah, we've got next week's will be the 200. I don't even know if we've got anything special lined up.
We'll have to.
Who knows? Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for listening. Remember to subscribe and we'll catch you next week.
Bye now.
Bye.